Welcome to the Mischief Maker broadcast, where chaos, creativity, and common sense collide. Your host, Joel Freeman, was kicked out of high school in Alberta, Canada. He left home at 17 and hitchhiked around North America as a long-haired hippie and dope-smoking fool. He made a 180-degree change, becoming one of the first chaplains in the history of the NBA. As a professional speaker, Joel has traveled to well over 55 countries. His many books have been published in 28 foreign translations. Pieces from his Black History collection have been seen by millions at the United Nations and many other venues. And now, the Chief Mischief Maker himself, Dr. Joel A. Freeman.
Hey guys, Teenager Joel here. I just read an article in Newsweek magazine that scared the living daylights out of me. Scientists warn of a coming ice age, global freezing, and famine. Hope you guys in the future are okay. Well, I'm very thankful that Teenager Joel has such positive feelings about those of us in the future. And we weren't encumbered by the ice age that Newsweek predicted. Our scientists in Newsweek predicted. Anyway, we've got a great show, a wonderful show today, whenever you're watching this. And we have someone by the name of Larry A. Ross. Now, the A, I think his mother was thinking of the word awesome, or amazing, but we've got Larry A. Ross with us. And he's a PR expert. He has built a massive public relations organization that has offices in, I think it's Charlotte, Nashville, Dallas. I think I'm correct on that. He'll correct me if I'm not. And has just a tremendous reach. Has done a lot of work with a lot of different organizations, and has kind of, I guess, over the years built a crossroads between the religious community and the general market community, and with representing, I guess, pictures like the VeggieTales, the Passion of the Christ, the Prince of Egypt. I think there's one called Jonah and the Pirates Who Didn't Do Anything. Or he's just got a whole list of things that he's done with Hollywood, with media, with all kinds of different organizations around the world. Not long ago, he was in Nigeria speaking before an enormous crowd in Lagos. And here he is with us tonight. But for those who are, I got a little bit to share with you. He's a mischief maker. I only interview mischief makers on this show. And if you want to know more about that, just go to the Mischief Maker, the QR code there, and that'll take you to a link that provides kind of a link tree with a lot of different layers to what the Mischief Maker Show is all about, the definition of a mischief maker, where we're going with this show, and what we're all about. And then some other things. Our sponsor, the Rosetta Universe. I've got some swag on here, and a Jack Johnson belt, and a bunch of different other things that you might bump into and enjoy on your own. And furthermore, you can take a look at some other shows that we've had over the last, I think this is 65 or 66 show we've had so far here on the Source Radio TV network. And we just really enjoy being here. Also, for those who are live, you know who you are. Feel free to weigh in if you got any questions, any thoughts, any comments, anything on your mind. And we're going to jump right into the song. I wrote this song. I've got an album coming out real soon called The Mischief Maker, appropriately so. But we have in this song right here is called When You Know, You Know. And this is a song I wrote about probably a year and a half ago. So Mel, let's hit it.
The hummingbird flaps its wings, 50 beats a second, a marvel of creation, precision that can't be reckoned. The butterfly's migration, spanning across the seas, guided by an unseen hand, carried by the breeze. The coral reefs kaleidoscope, a vibrant living art. Ecosystems intertwine, play in every part. When you know that it's clear to see. Intelligent design in all its majesty. The northern lights, a dance of colors in flight. Electrons meet the atmosphere, a stunning sight. The honeybee's precision in a hive of symmetry. A pattern so remarkable, it speaks of divinity. When you know, there's a hand behind it all. A touch of the divine in every rise and fall. Each year a beautiful design, from the stars to the sea, points to the Creator in perfect harmony. To the heavens, see the stars align, the dance of constellations, each one in perfect time. The spiral of a galaxy, the vast Milky Way, whispers of a grand design, lighting up the night and day. Harmony. The DNA within us, a code of life so grand, 3 billion letters long, written by the master's hand. From the smallest atom spin to the elephant's grace, every intricate detail, a testament to faith. When you know, there's a hand behind it all, a touch of the divine in every rise and fall. Each year a beautiful design, from the stars to the sea, points to the Creator in perfect harmony.
Well, there you have it. When you know, you know. So, Larry, come on board. Let's do this.
Hello, Joel. It's great to be with you. Thank you for this opportunity to share with your viewers, listeners, audience all around the world.
Well, Larry,
by the way, I saw your definition of a mischief maker, and I know that the Mischief Makers podcast is where chaos, creativity, and common sense collide. So we just saw the creativity, bravo, and a terrific video. So that leaves you and I to deal with chaos and common sense for the rest of the hour, I guess. Is that it?
I guess so. I'll be the chaos, you be the common sense, okay? Is that a deal?
That's great. Your song reminded me of a former president. I don't want to get political here, but who said famously years ago, to someone who says there is no God, it's like enjoying a sumptuous meal and then saying there is no cook. Obviously, what you've just showed, all the results of creation show there's something behind it. And so thank you for that reminder.
Well,
You know,
thank
I'm
you.
also in looking at some of the previous podcasts prior to tonight. I saw your introduction, and interesting how you and I met on the Carson campaign 10 years ago this year. I was communications director. You're a longtime friend of then Dr. Carson, now Secretary Carson, who's just a wonderful human being. But you, our career and life arcs were much different. You got kicked out of high school, a self-identified prodigal son, if you will. I was, if anybody knows that story in the Bible, I was the older brother, loyal
Hmm.
in the fields. And if you remember, he was the saddest person in the story because he was resentful and he did the right, and he just resented everybody. He was doing everything right and got the raw end of the deal. So I just find it interesting that we had these different career and life paths and you ended up in the same place. And so it's great to I just appreciate your friendship, and I'm grateful for this opportunity.
You're one of the good ones. Well, Larry, yeah, I know you've been like the point person, the spokesperson for people like Rick Warren, Billy Graham, T.D. Jakes, and others. And we're going to maybe touch on that down the road here in this show today. But I'd like for us to take a step back and take a look at your childhood, growing up. What informed your desire to get into communications and PR work, and some of the biggest influences in your life that informed that decision?
Sure. Well, I grew up in Wheaton, Illinois. My father was a Bible scholar. He was I mean, an intellectual. He taught at the graduate school, seminary level, and I. But grew up in a Christian home, but God has no grandchildren. I had to find my way to faith. Made a commitment to first time at 5 years old in Sunday school. Rededicated my life to the Lord in high school, and then the house my boyhood home had to be raised in order to build the Billy Graham Center on the campus of Wheaton College, an alma mater that we share. And I went on for 34 years, privileged to serve as his personal media spokesperson, traveled all around the world. And I was probably the poster child for evangelicalism. You won't find anybody who drank more Kool-Aid than me, but I had traveled after traveling 27 years with Billy Graham in global evangelism, stadiums around the world. My story, my testimony is then I met Jesus. I thought I knew Jesus, but I was doing Jesus. And it was a marketing construct. I was writing press releases, like with Dr. Carson in the campaign, that were read by tens of millions of people. But I wasn't in personal ministry with anybody. And I was I just thought, I hope God knows how lucky he is to have me, the hardest working guy in ministry, on his team. But that's a ridiculous mindset. And a friend of mine helped me understand that the gospel is not a doctrine to be memorized or a debate to be won, as I was taught growing up, but it's a person, Jesus. And that was a game changer for me. And so my motto used to be suit up, show up, let God do the rest. Now I've added a third, lift up the name of Jesus. And it's made a big difference in my life, my approach to work, because I used to think that information was transformation. I had a head full of truth, but not a heart of love. And that's just something that God has been reforming me ever since the last probably 12, 14 years.
Now, when you were working with Billy Graham, did you deal directly with him, or do you have to go through layers of people
No, I
before you
was.
represent
I
him?
never worked for the Billy Graham Association. Was always on contract at Mr. Graham's request, so that I could work directly with him. And anytime there was anything involving media, whether it was a crusade or an interview on television or whatever, writing press releases or helping him and whenever he spoke around the world. So we worked very close together, and it was a great privilege. He was obviously a client at first, became a mentor and a friend. And I don't think we'll see anyone the likes of Mr. Graham in our lifetime again.
Now,
People have
we hear,
asked me if there was one word to describe him, I have to use four: humility, integrity, authenticity, and love. He was an ambassador of God's love around the world. and was very inclusive in his message.
We hear stories of a lot of people in some type of religious activity or whatever, and then they have these heights and then this great fall. What did Billy Graham do to? I know you hear stories about how he sent people into his hotel room first to see if there's a naked woman in there and a photographer. You hear stories of all kinds of different things, how he protected himself in terms of the finances, in terms of any rumor mills getting started. What do you know personally as a result of working with him?
Well, first of all, I think he was faithful to his calling. He had an anointing on his life, and he was, despite his fame and renown, he considered himself a country boy called to preach. And he didn't really understand why he was in that place where he was at. He had a lot of accountability. Never traveled alone, always traveled with a colleague, as you mentioned. Had a board that provided governance for the organization that just kept everything on the straight and narrow. But I think that the thing about Billy Graham was there weren't two Billy Grahams. The one you'd see on television or hear it preach in a stadium is the same one you'd meet one-on-one. And it's interesting. I would set up all these interviews for him, and when I would watch the reporters who would interview with him, it was difficult for them to get started because he was asking questions about them. It was not like they're interviewing one of the most famous people in the world. It was like they were the most important person in the world at that time. And I think he had a real gift in just helping people. And he always had an interest in people and a love for people, regardless of who they are, their background. I have been very involved in the National Prayer Breakfast the last 30 or 40 years. And I always thought that Mr. Graham was uniquely wired to preach the gospel faithfully in stadiums around the world. But when he was with leaders, particularly leaders of other countries, of other faiths, he wouldn't proselytize. He wouldn't try to preach. He would just love them. And I think that I thought that was intuitive on his part. The fellow who ran the prayer breakfast told me it was intentional. That was the deal they made, that as an evangelist, preach in the stadiums, give them both barrels, but when we're with these leaders, we're just going to love them. And that's the way he did it for his entire career.
Did you get to know his wife, Ruth? I know she made someone asked her a question, have you ever thought of divorce? And she said, no, murder maybe.
She was probably she could be a co-chief mischief maker with you, Joel. She had a great sense of humor. And like you said, she was a force of nature and had a ministry in her own right. And of course, often she raised that family alone because her husband was traveling a good deal of the time. Mr. Graham was once asked towards the end of his career, what he would do differently if he'd do it over again. And he said that he would travel less and study more. And because obviously it took a great toll, particularly in the early years when travel wasn't as easy as it is now.
So are there any stories you can tell that maybe you've never shared before that you're able to share or have shared before about Billy and your inner workings with him? Oh,
sure. There are many stories. I've just telling you one. I would tell you about how he had a love for people. He spent a lot of time in Hollywood, particularly in the early years, and he had many friends in Hollywood. And early on in my time with him, we went out he participated in a CBS special, George Burns' 80 Years in Show Business. And I had to rent a tuxedo for 2 nights, Beverly Hilton Hotel, same setup, same seat. And they had about 40 guests over 2 nights filming this special. And Mr. Graham was in the era of Oh God. Remember the Oh God films? Well, they wanted him to tell Oh God jokes. And I worked with the producers, probably rewrote the script 20 times to get something that he could be comfortable with and they were comfortable with. Anyway, there's a who's who of people in Hollywood. And one night, Buddy Hackett came by the table. Remember Buddy Hackett? Yeah. Hilarious. I mean, just a vaudeville comedian, for those of you who don't know, very portly man, probably 300 pounds. I don't know how many kilos that is, but he came by and just saw Mr. Graham and said, "Billy," and he spits when he talks, and so Mr. Graham stood up, I stood up, and then Mr. Hackett launched into a filthy joke. I mean, it was. I'm sorry to say I'd heard it, and I thought, "Oh my goodness, this is not going to end well." And I looked at the table, men and women, mixed company, some Hollywood executives, and they all had this look of shock and awe in their face because obviously they knew it was coming too. Mr. Graham was clueless. So anyway, I thought, well, maybe Mr. Hackett has a different punchline that I heard. I think involved women's body parts. I don't know. But anyway, he tells his story and he gets to the end and he lands the plane. And sure enough, it was what I feared. And there was this loud sucking sound, this collective gasp from the table. And everybody turns to Mr. Graham. And you know what he did?
What?
It was the greatest sermon I ever heard Mr. Graham preach. He just chuckled and said, "Ho, ho, ho, buddy." And he turned and he gave him a big bear hug. And then he turned to the table and said, "Buddy Hackett has been one of my closest friends in Hollywood for years."
Mm.
And I just thought that he just loved him. That's the way he was everywhere he went.
Now, this show is a politics-free zone, but I just wanted to kind of stick our big toe in politics for just a second. That he was an advisor to many presidents, and I think that the most troubling to him was Nixon, because when he was with Nixon, Nixon never cursed, but of course Nixon's famous tapes where he cursed all the time, and that really seemed to bother Billy later on. About cursing and how he was just astonished by that. Any thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I think Mr. Graham, that he knew he was friends with 12 presidents in his lifetime, all but one. Mr. Truman was in office when he first came to the national scene, but all the others he'd known long before they got into national office. In fact, there's a wonderful book, if any of your listeners were interested, called "The Preacher and the President." It's written by Nancy Gibbs, former editor of Time magazine, and Michael Duffy, her longtime Washington bureau chief. Each took a chapter, every other chapter with a president. And their idea was that Billy had two crusades, the ones in the stadiums and then the other to the White House. But at the end, they interviewed him 4 times. I sat in on all the interviews. And when they broached their thesis to him, I saw this look of surprise on his face because he said, "There was no crusade. These are my friends. I was just hanging out with my friends and ministering to my friends." And among them was Mr. Nixon. And I think he was probably criticized for that relationship more than any other. But I'll tell you a quick story. One of the first things I did in 1994 after starting this agency, I'd been with another firm for 13 years and then started my own firm, was accompany Mr. Graham out to officiate Pat Nixon's funeral at the Nixon Library. And he did the homily, and then someone came out on the staff and said, the president would like to greet you all, and we're going to go in and meet with the family for a few minutes and come out. So we went in and stood. There was about 1,000 people in the library. And the president came out, gave a speech for an hour, and then he said, "I want to meet each of you personally. I'm going to stand by that flag. I want to shake everybody's hand." I thought, well, this is my chance to see Mr. Nixon or meet Mr. Nixon. So I got in line. I felt bad because Henry Kissinger and all of his old cronies were there. But I got up there and I said, "Hello, Mr. President. I'm Larry Ross. I'm here with Billy Graham." And Joel, it was unbelievable. He teared up and he grabbed my hand and he pulled me in and put his other arm around my elbow and held me there for like 3 minutes, crying, weeping. And he shared what Mr. Graham's relationship with him meant and how he'd stayed with him through thick and thin and a lot of the pressures in the White House. And I remember walking away thinking, okay, now I get it. Now I understand that relationship because it was pastoral. It was just, He was just a ministry of presence that Mr. Graham had with all of these people in the White House.
Without expecting anything from them.
And they always went in the side entrance, no fanfare and no selfies in the Oval Office. And so I think that that's a part of his. Obviously, people are aware of his public ministry, but his ministry behind the scenes was probably as impactful as what he did publicly in his preaching.
Now, other relationships he had in Hollywood and other places. Who would be the most surprising figure that you could think of that was very close with him, and he with that person?
Well, it'd be hard to pick one because there were just so many people who, and it wasn't just in America. A lot of foreign leaders. Mr. Graham was very ahead of his time, going behind the Iron Curtain, preaching the gospel, and criticized greatly for it. But I think one that comes to mind is his relationship with Mr. Marriott, Bill Marriott, William Marriott Sr., who's based right there in Washington. He preached his funeral, even though Mr. Marriott is a Mormon. They spent a lot of time together. He had a lot of deep conversations, spiritual conversations, and he preached his funeral. I think that says a lot for just the impact that he had personally with some of these folks. Another interesting experience I had. Remember John F. Kennedy when his plane went down with his wife? Tragic thing back in the mid '90s, and Mr. Graham had given him an interview for George magazine as a wedding gift, and they were coming back from their honeymoon when that. To interview us with him that day. And I remember as the interview was over, a very impressive young man had all of his questions on cards and was asking Mr. Graham a lot
Talking
of
about
questions.
JFK Jr.
JFK Jr. He was the editor of George magazine.
Yes.
And as he was packing up his equipment, recording equipment when it was over, Mr. Graham said, I really admired your father. I really appreciated my relationship with your father. And I'll never forget our last conversation together. It was at the prayer breakfast. It would have been February '63. And he said, when Mr. Graham was the speaker, and of course the president always speaks. So when it was over, the president turned to Mr. Graham and said, Billy, I have a question I want to ask you. Why don't you get in the limousine with me and we'll go back to the White House together? And Mr. Graham said, well, I'm honored, Mr. President. I'd love to, but I think I'm coming down with a flu, and I don't want you to get it. Okay, well, we'll do it another time. And he said we never had that opportunity. And Graham told his son, I think that it was something spiritual, and I've always regretted. It's always haunted me that we never had that conversation. And then John F. Kennedy Jr., John, I think Mr. Graham called him, for another half hour, started asking him questions of what does my church believe? How is that different from the way your church believes? And I realized here is a young man who's got the world by the tail, sexiest man alive, according to People magazine and everything else. But all he knows about his father is what he can piece together from stories told by people who knew him, like Mr. Graham. It was very gut-wrenching to watch that happen for me.
Now, way back in the early days, he was out doing these tent revival meetings, whatever you want to call them, and then Mr. Hearst, was it Randolph Hearst, had heard about
William
him,
Randolph.
and then he used he said the term "puff of Graham." Is that how things started? Yeah,
well, he was preaching a tent crusade in 1949 in Los Angeles. And, they just had crowds coming each night, but it really, that story in the paper turbocharged those meetings. And he went on the next spring to speak in Ivy League schools all up and down New England. And there was huge crowds of young people just because of the publicity. Mr. Graham said that the press, there's a plaque in the Billy Graham Center at Wheaton College that says the press wasn't the most important thing in his work, but God used media coverage in a powerful way to extend the impact of his ministry. And I believe, and consider the source because that was my job, but I believe that despite Mr. Graham's myriad giftings and his ability to preach, I think one of the distinctives of his ministry was his ability to make positive points for the gospel in any media situation. You could ask him how he gets his suits dry cleaned on the road, and he'd turn it into a gospel witness. And I believe that there are three things that made his media work so effective. One, he never approached media as marketing. It was always ministry. He saw it as a extended platform for his message. Number two, he never became activist on any particular issue. He remained an advocate for the Christian faith, showing how the Bible speaks to personal and societal problems. What a lot of other Christian leaders would approach as a political or an economic or a social problem, he would just address it as a problem of the heart, because man's heart's the same the world over. And then thirdly, while other Christian leaders were becoming political, Mr. Graham remained pastoral and addressed those problems of the heart. So I think God honored his faithfulness in that regard.
I think he endorsed Nixon, was it? And then he said from that point on, he was never going to endorse any other president.
It's interesting. It was when you and I connected on the campaign, that was a conundrum for me at first when I was approached by Dr. Carson, because while I had been involved in many political issues with Mr. Graham, he always addressed political issues in his preaching a lot, but cultural issues and societal issues. But he was assiduously nonpartisan. If he was invited to pray at one of the political conventions, he would only say yes if he also prayed at the other. So he famously said, "I'm not for the left wing or the right wing, I'm for the whole bird." And so he did not get involved in partisan politics in that way. So because my name was so closely associated with his, I couldn't either. And so when Dr. Carson called me and asked me to serve as his communications director, I thought, well, I haven't engaged in that. I'm Switzerland. I'm neutral here. What do I do? And then I realized that Dr. Carson was, as you know, Joel, was not a politician. He's a citizen statesman on a mission for God and the common good, and messaging him was no different than Billy Graham or Rick Warren or T.D. Jakes or some of the other folks that we've represented. By the way, I know that you have a lot of African-American, Black audience listening to this program. And for about 5 years, we were privileged to represent Bishop T.D. Jakes, if you know who he is.
Yes.
Probably one of the best preachers on the planet in terms of his ability to deliver a message. I remember one time we were on a book tour. He was a prolific author. The publisher had sent a car to take us from the book signing down on Wall Street up to a book signing at a church in Harlem at 110th Street. As we're riding up the West Side Highway, his assistant's phone rang. And by the look on his face, I knew it wasn't a good call. And Mr. Gray said to the bishop, he said, "Hey, Bishop, did you know you're supposed to preach at this church?" And he said, "No, nobody told me. Nobody told any of us. I thought it was a book signing." He said, "Well, they've had people in the church full for 3 hours, and there's 10,000 people outside trying to get in, and they're trying to set up overflow speakers. So you're going to preach." So the bishop sat in the car. We're going along and kind of thought about it for a second. Then he said, "Has anybody got a Bible?" And I had one in my briefcase. I said, "Well, I do, Bishop." And I handed it to him. So he opened it up. I remember, I don't know which chapter, but I saw he was in John. And he looked at it for about 2 minutes, my Bible, no notes in it. And then he handed it back to me. When we got there were policemen on horses, directing traffic with the bicycle. It was chaos. And we pulled up to the side door, and he turned to me and he said, "Let me see that Bible." And he took that Bible and he walked right out of the car, through the door, onto the stage. And 2.5 hours later, soaking wet, he sweated all the way down to his knees on his suit, preached up a storm, not having any preparation, with a borrowed Bible. And that's just, I want to explain that by the favor of God.
We're going to take a break right now. We're near past the top of the hour, but when we come back, I want us to kind of switch the channel a little bit, and we're going to talk about some of the biggest mistakes that you see founders make in trying to pitch themselves to the media. and we're going to talk about some of the practical brass tacks of PR and how you help people.
Absolutely.
So Mel, let's hit the break here, and we'll be back in a shortly. Don't change that dial. Hi, I'm Joel Freeman, the founder of the Rosetta Universe. Join us in transforming this ancient artifact, the Rosetta Stone, into a modern metaphor for critical thinking and problem solving. Young people today are overwhelmed by information, but most do not have a roadmap for the practical use of that knowledge. By turning thinking into a simple 7-step Rosetta process, we are making it feel doable rather than intimidating. It shifts the focus from being smart to being disciplined, which is a game changer for many students who struggle. Our reach is for the following grade bands: K2, 3-5, 6-8, 9-12, college, and beyond. Give me a call with any wisdom and advice. Here's my personal cell, 410-991-9718. I'm looking forward to our conversation. There you have it. What we're doing is we're transforming this ancient artifact into a modern metaphor for problem solving. What I've done is I've taken the word Rosetta and have developed 7 steps for using the acronym Rosetta to solve pretty much any problem in about 8 to 10 categories of problems. You go to the QR code or rosettauniverse.com, and it'll tell you all about this. We have folks like, different folks like Kathy Hughes and Ben Carson and just a whole bunch of folks that are on board as on our advisory board. And if you have any ideas, let me know. Plus, we have this beautiful belt. This is the Jack Johnson belt that I designed, and we're only making 700 of these worldwide. They're hand numbered, hand designed, and so if you want one of these, the only way to get it is to donate. And after 700 are out there, each one has its own number, limited edition, then we will be destroying the design, never to be used again. Let's switch back to Larry. And Larry, we have a simple question, Larry, from Lucy Chang. How did you get into marketing on the grand scale that you have?
Well, thank you, Lucy, for your question. And it's kind of like my life story is kind of like Joel's. It's not something I would recommend to anybody. I was the poster child for not only evangelicalism, but for a liberal arts education. I was a biology and economics major, was pre-med at first, and then I got to my senior year, I thought, if I don't get into med school, I don't want to teach biology. So I took 11 out of the required economics courses as a biology and an economics major, and I've been a PR guy for 50 years. I did it by doing the next thing. I started off with a nonprofit in Chicago, traveled nationally representing them in churches and college campuses, and was hired by the General Motors Corporation. Great training ground to learn guerrilla PR out in the field, booking my own shows, and with a longest running stage show at the time called Previews of Progress. Some of you may have seen it. And then I was hired off the road by at the time, 8th largest public relations firm in New York City, Creamer Dixon Bassford. Among other things I mentioned earlier, I represented Joe DiMaggio as spokesperson for the Bowery Savings Bank. So twice a month or more, we'd bring Mr. DiMaggio in, and I'd take him around, do media and appearances. And it was a relationship that I recognized I wasn't his best friend. I was there to do a job, but we developed this very close working relationship because I learned an astronomy principle, Joel, called the Helion effect. Are you familiar with it?
Tell me
It
about
says a planet is least stable the closest it gets to its sun. So what I tried to do with DiMaggio and Billy Graham and every other client is I keep an elliptical orbit. I come in and do my job, and I come out, and I don't hang around, because it's pretty unstable. And so as a result, we had a very good working relationship, and I was grateful for that opportunity. But I went in 1981 from a sports icon to a faith icon, Mr. Graham. And again, it's nothing I planned. I just suit up, show up, and do the next thing. And I'm just grateful for the way it unfolded. But thank you for your question.
For someone like Lucy, thank you, Lucy. What would you say to someone who's maybe wanting to get into this type of business? I know you suited up and showed up, but are there some intentional things that someone can do if they want to do this?
Sure. Don't forget, there's a lot of. I'm older than dirt. This is the 50th year since I started working. I graduated from college in 1976. I remember accompanying Mr. Graham to his 50th high school reunion, and then he and his wife to their 50th college reunion back in 1993. And I remember thinking, man, these people are so stinking old. And now I are one. But I was a traditional PR guy. And back then when I started, you want to get somebody in the news, you have to write a news release and mail it. There was no email. Later we had fax. But now there's so many opportunities. Of course, digital communication goes straight to your audience and bifurcate and segment. But we have AI coming, and I have been very involved. I have a fellow who's mentoring me the last 9 months in AI, and I don't know where you're at on AI, Joel, or anybody in your audience. I thought it was just a better, faster search engine, and it is, but AI is not just about data. It's a language-based process that identifies knowledge fingerprints. Everybody's got a knowledge fingerprint. You do, I do, we're all unique. And that's a game changer. For a lifelong wordsmith, I realized, boy, this is now in my wheelhouse. So I would say don't be afraid of AI. It's going to change the world. We won't even recognize the world in 2 years. But I think that there's so many opportunities for people, whether it's leveraging AI or in the communications field. But it's so different than when I started. My greatest recommendation would be to strengthen your writing skills, because if you are a good writer, you can write your own ticket. And that's such an important aspect of it. The other thing is, despite all of the emerging technology, the most important thing is the message. These are just, the Bible talks about putting old wine in new wineskins. These are just new wineskins, new platforms to get the message out. But the message is still the most important thing. And we've just transitioned our agency. We've rebranded it. And our son comes out of a mainstream branding and strategic marketing background, is now at the helm as president. And we're putting together the workshops helping even legacy companies, ministries, and organizations that have been around for a while understand, break down their identity to the core of who they are, and then build it up again, because that has to be communicated across various platforms. You can't just mass distribute your message anymore. You've got to get it out, LinkedIn, Instagram, all these different platforms in different ways. And so understanding your identity and projecting that rather than being pejoratively defined by others who might have an agenda is a very important process.
And what's the biggest mistakes that you see founders or brand makers make as they try to pitch themselves to the media?
Well, I think that perhaps in Hollywood it's done a lot more than in my world, but we've always been very careful to not manufacture an image, but rather project an identity that already exists. And I think that authenticity of all the people that I've worked with, if you say Billy Graham, some of these other great Christian leaders, Mel Gibson, for example, we help him on the Passion of the Christ. Very authentic, different calling from Billy Graham, and yet faithful to what he was called to do. He felt God really called him to make that movie, and it was a project of the heart for him. And I remember when my first meeting with Mel, he was on the ropes. He was being sued by an ad hoc group of theologians who had convened on the internet around a stolen script that was about 15 versions back. And Joel, you know, as a creative guy, a script is not a movie. It changes. It's a living document.
Yes. Yeah.
So he was being sued. And so we started with crisis communications and then segued into helping him once got that sorted out. But I remember in the first meeting, I said, a quote from Charles Spurgeon, the famous British preacher, that the word of God is like a lion. You don't have to defend it, just turn it loose. And I said, that's true with your movie, Mel. Just turn this lion loose and let this movie speak for itself. And he actually took a page from the main character in his film, Jesus, and didn't defend himself, and he let others come to his defense. The second thing I said in our first meeting was, there's a principle in communications. Anybody who's thinking about communication is probably aware of this, that the largest number of people focused on the smallest point of agreement gives you your greatest impact. Think about that. The largest number
Say it again.
The largest number of people focused on the smallest point of agreement gives you your greatest impact. Joel, you have a worldwide audience here, mischief makers. They're all eclectic, all backgrounds and whatever. But what is the one point of agreement? Maybe it's that Joel Freeman is a guy who takes his work, but not himself, seriously. And I think that you have fun in your work, and that's a winsome way of looking at very serious topics. Whatever the common denominator is, something is holding this together. And so I said that to Mel, recognizing that he's got to build an army of people of faith, Catholics, Protestants, Pentecostals, evangelicals, across the board. What's that one point of agreement? And he looked, without even a hesitation, said that Jesus Christ died for our sins. That's something we can all agree on. And I said, well, let's go with that. And became the highest box office R-rated movie in history.
Wow. Can you tell a story about a time when you turned a minor organization company into into something that was just a major media feature?
I'm sorry. Where we?
Can you share a story about a time when you turned a minor company or some update or something like that into a major media feature?
Well, first of all, I don't want to take credit for it. We were just, I had a front row seat on for Mr. Graham, what God was doing in his ministry, but also helping. I see what we do as providing crossover communications at the threshold of faith and culture. And there's a story in the Bible where the army of the children of Israel is losing against, I think it's the Amalekites, but Moses is on a cliff, and as long as he has his arms up, they're prevailing. And when he drops his arms, they fall back. And there's two men God raised up, Aaron and Hur, to hold up the arms of Moses. That's our job, to hold up the arms of the men and women of God. And in many cases, that involves helping them to refine messaging that will connect with the audiences they're trying to reach. And I'll give you one example. The Bishop Jakes I mentioned earlier, when he moved to Dallas in 1996,
I
and
remember that.
he was pretty much unknown in this part of the country. Maybe you're closer to West Virginia, but really outside of the state, not many people knew who he was. But I had heard him preach, and I knew what a brilliant communicator he was. So he came here, and so we got involved, and for 5 years, handled all of his media until he took it in-house. I'll never forget the first time I pitched him to Larry King. And I had to beat the door down to get him on because they didn't know who he was. And Larry King was a very, established show. But I'd work a lot with the producer, had Mr. Graham on a number of times. And I said, listen, we've never let you down. Trust me, just take a flyer here. I think he's got a lot to say on this topic. And it's worth the risk or whatever. Well, they did. They had him on for the whole hour. And I'll never forget when it was over, Larry King banged his fist on the desk and turned to his producer and said, who was that guy? Let's get him back on. So he went from Bishop Who to, he was, an up arrow. And the last thing we did for Bishop was we got him on the cover of Time magazine the week of 9/11, the real 9/11, if you remember. And the cover, his photo on the front, and the headline was, "Is this man the next Billy Graham?" So he went from that relative obscurity to that, and of course, we were just able to. We had a lot to work with, and anointing and the favor of God that's on him, and he was very faithful himself.
How do you determine the best media outlet or podcast for a client? Hitchhiking off that the story you just told.
Well, obviously there's a formula: reach times frequency equals impact. So it's somewhat of a numbers game, but it also is out of relationships. And getting someone placed in the media, it starts with good press relations and developing relationships and keeping them up. And so we work very hard at that. It's a different game now, but back then that's what it was. But there is inspirational faith media, if you will. There's also mainstream media, and you have to tailor your marketing accordingly. You have to have a different way of. You can't use ecclesiastical terms or parochial terms if you're in a network platform versus if you're on Christian radio. So helping to adapt the message for the audience is very important. We do a lot of crisis communications, Joel, and a lot of it is under NDA and all. Can't talk about it, but I did a seminar a while back that get me into the news, get me out of the news. And it's always interesting that you've got clients who want you to get them in the newspaper, and then there's other clients who want you to get them out. So it works both ways.
That was actually my next leading to my next question is when people come to you who want to get out of the news, to use the title of that seminar, what are some of the first things that you look at? Of course, keeping NDA, everything confidential, but in a generic way, what are some of the first things you want to know before you represent somebody?
Well, first of all, it's very important to realize that public relations can't make black white, but you can emphasize a brighter shade of gray. We're not talking about putting lipstick on a pig, or in many cases, we've gotten involved in situations where we won't. We usually represent the offended party, if you will, where they're perhaps even a victim themselves. The first three questions you have to ask is, what did you know, when did you know it, and what did you do about it? And often, if it's involving situations where inappropriate behavior, there's a lot of it these days, the folks who do that they don't only groom victims, they groom everybody. And so obviously it's important that we do a lot of training, churches, for example, volunteer training on sex abuse and what to look out for, that kind of a thing. So that's important to do, try to mitigate the risk. But even with all that they do, background checks and everything, sometimes a first-time offender is not known. The other thing is we have done a lot of work with Christian colleges and universities in recent years and rewriting their core documents in terms of their mission, because under the law, they are able to have a voluntary community based on a shared framework of faith and hire to mission. But they have to state that in their core documents, and that's what gives them protection under the law. A lot of them are not. They have to shore that up. So that's a big part of the work we were doing for in the last decade or so.
So you hinted about personal relationships with journalists and people in the media. How do you cultivate that, for lack of a better term? How do you expand that, and what does that look like?
Well, first of all, representing someone like Billy Graham, he had a very good relationship with the media. And so whenever I was working with these folks, I would develop a rapport. And it was interesting because I never broached the subject. I never initiated it, but was available if any asked. And often I'd get into some very deep theological discussions with some of these producers, network producers, like, do you believe this stuff, or is this just a client for you? That kind of a thing. Or a friend of mine wants to know, and all that, which is fine.
Yeah.
And but I would always be very careful to not initiate that, but be available. So that was
Why
I
didn't
think,
you initiate that?
what's that?
Why didn't you initiate that?
Well, I wanted to be professional, and
I see.
obviously, I want to be sensitive to why I'm there to represent, to do my job, and they have a job to do. But I also know that in a zeal to get a story, you can't overlook the person on the other end of the microphone is a person too. And I know Dr. King, Larry King, and Mr. Graham, whenever they would interview. They would always talk about death. It was a subject that was very, very much on Mr. King's mind and heart. And so during the breaks, they would talk about that a great deal. So it wasn't out of bounds. It was just something that you wanted to handle judiciously. And I think that there are a number of people of faith, people who are very, they don't just report the news, but they are very thoughtful in how they do their stories. Again, the news business is changing, and I saw this firsthand, Joel, on the campaign. I'll give you an example. Anymore, the media tend less to report the news and operate out of narrative, finding sources that will just, reinforce that. In fact, what people have asked me, who is the best person you've seen interview Billy Graham? Sent in hundreds of interviews with Billy Graham. Hands down, Dan Rather is my response. People are often surprised at that. But in 1991, Mr. Rather was doing a 5-part series for the evening news called God and Gorbachev. And we met him in an uptown, Upper East Side boutique hotel. And I've never seen anybody else do this. Most interviewers, maybe yourself included, have a clipboard with 50 questions, and by golly, we're not going to stop until we get through all 50 questions. Mr. Rather had nothing in his hands except the first question written on the inside of his hand. Everything else for an hour and 15 minutes flowed out of the conversation.
Yes.
Yeah, he started that one question, and then everything else came out of whatever Mr. Graham said, and he reacted. And so about 10 years later, 15 maybe, I sat next to Mr. Rather at a media dinner at the National Prayer Breakfast. We weren't at the same table. I was here and he was here. We were shoulder to shoulder. So I reintroduced myself, and then I asked him, Mr. Rather, how has the news business changed since you sat in the chair? I'll never forget his answer. He said, when I was news anchor, there were only 3 options: ABC, CBS, NBC. But he said, now with this proliferation of 24-hour cable, people no longer go to the news for information, they go for validation. If you're a conservative, you watch Fox News. If you're a liberal, you go to MSNBC or CNN. And so everybody's in their silos of validation. And I thought, well, that's very sad, but I think it's probably an accurate description. 2 weeks after that, I had dinner with David Weston, who was the former president of ABC News Division, and I ran that quote by him and asked him what he thought. And he said, well, that's absolutely correct, but for a reason different than what you think. He said, it's all advertising driven. He said, CNN can get far more for their ads per spot if they can show 5 million loyal listeners, loyal viewers that only watch CNN when their TV's on versus 20 million that come in and out. And so they put on advertising that is catering to the people who they know are watching the programs.
You know what? Our time is almost just about gone.
This is the most fun I've ever had without laughing. Oh, whatever we did. I guess I can't say that anymore.
Any final thoughts? We get about maybe 30 seconds.
Well, it's a delight to chat with you, Joel. We text each other frequently, and I just want to encourage you in this show. And you have some remarkable guests, the present company excluded. But I love your approach to life and learning. You're a lifelong learner. Keep it up. And we've talked about issues of faith, and I'm sorry if it was not perhaps understandable to some, but anyone, I just say, encourage everyone to think about what their eternal destiny is when they die, because we're all going to have to deal with it one day.
That's right. That's right.
God bless you,
Larry,
brother.
thank you so much for taking time out, and hang in there, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You have just experienced another episode of the Mischief Maker broadcast. Hit the subscribe button. Connect at chiefmischiefmaker.com. Thanks for coming along for the ride. And hopefully, you are now a bit closer to becoming a mischief maker in your part of the world.